Okay, so we are looking at the first intermediate period this week, and the object I wanted to look at, or objects, are what they're called funeral replicas. And these date from the first intermediate period and into the early Middle Kingdom, which is the next phase of Egyptian history we'll look at next week. I showed you this slide when I gave you a quick introduction to the first intermediate period. So these funerary models, or as some scholars like to call them, replicas, they are showing scenes from maybe what is considered daily life in ancient Egypt during this time. And we'll look at some examples. It'll be a little more clear than this black and white issue. So what exactly are these? I just mentioned they're probably showing scenes from daily life. So you see everything from butcher shops where they're butchering the animals, shops where they're making bread and beer, making other things like pottery, and scenes from daily life like being on a boat, taking a census of the cattle, and so on. And what these are probably showing is they're showing what the people did who were buried. And these replica models, again, can tell us quite a bit about what was happening. And I really wanted to focus on the first intermediate period, but some of these are from the early Middle Kingdom, but we can still talk about the same things. So here's one example from one of the tombs. This is clearly a model of a boat. You can see people doing what they're doing on the boat. Down here, let me just get my little pen going. You can see the sail. You can see an oar here. And these people are doing whatever they're doing on this particular boat. Now this is a scene, it's a little bit hard to see, it's in black and white. This is from a tomb of an official called Mektere, and he was right at the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. And his tomb had been discovered before this, and then scholars, I think in the 1920s, were digging around and found another room. And so when they broke the door of the chamber in, they found all of these wooden replicas. This one, I think I've got a slide of in here showing the census of the cattle. You can see that this is a boat, and then you've got other scenes. And there were 24 replicas or models found in his particular tomb. Here's one of them. So what you see here is this is the butcher shop. So you can see they're working on animals. This is a replica of a house with a garden. And you can see the type of plants that are being grown here. Here is the census of the cattle. So what you can see here are government officials sitting in a little structure. And what's happening is that people are walking by, and the government officials are counting the number of cattle. And we talked about this census of animals being taken in the Old Kingdom. So it's continuing on into the first intermediate period and into the Middle Kingdom. And then here's another scene of a boat. This one's a little better than the first one I showed you. Shows you a bit more detail of the boat. You can see the oars here. You can see the lead person. And then you can see all the rowers sitting in their seats. And then these models were taken out of their main form. And what they're doing is they are making bread. So here you've got some people rolling out the dough, and this person is stretching it and forming it, and then this person is putting it in the ovens. So again, these are really nice models to look at, or replicas to look at, showing us what's happening in the text that we're reading about, where they're talking about making bread. And then here's some more models or figurines where they're carrying various objects like bread and baskets with various things, and probably linen cloths and so on. So what are the functions of these replicas? Well, for one, you have to remember these are put into tombs. So they're not meant to be set out like what we see today if we go into a museum, if we're lucky enough to see one of these. They're not meant for a viewing audience. They're meant really for the resurrected person to continue doing the same work. And that's probably what is happening with these things. We're just lucky enough to find them. So of course, you know, the whole class is about sustainability. Maybe what they can tell us about sustainability is showing us what's actually happening in agriculture. So you see these scenes of people making bread. There's lots of them of people making beer. You can see the end results of agriculture, which of course is tied with the economy and with trade. And of course, it can also tell us about religion. Not only that these are buried in a tomb and they function so that when the person wakes up, they will continue on with their job, but it shows us that in religion, and we've talked about this before, is linked with agriculture, government, and economy. So all this is one big structure, and these replicas help us to understand a little bit more about what life was like in the first intermediate period. And if you remember, I talked a little bit about the debate in scholarship, whether the first intermediate period was a total collapse, or maybe an intermediate collapse, or maybe a time of creativity. At least we know from these models, we can guess that life continued on despite the collapse of the central government. So maybe that's one thing that we can think about as we look at these particular objects.